need a high-end designer or a lot of money to get a luxe look. Be your own interior designer.
This is Affordable Interior Design, the podcast.
Here's your host, Betsy Helmuth.
My first question comes from Kelsey, and she's writing from Pittsburgh. She writes, "Hi, Betsy. My family of 4 lives in a small ranch that is tight on space. We're in a season with little to spend on interior design, but I would love your recommendations. I don't feel my space well represents my personal style anymore. I'm trying to make the most of it now and also dream of upgrades that I can make in the future. The entirety of the general family space includes a couch area, which is pictured, that is just to the left of our front door. Our dining table is on the other side of the fireplace. This leads to a mostly empty small room that holds our piano and sliding doors to the outside. And this leads to the kitchen. My kids are 3 years old and 3 months old, so you'll see lots of toys in the corner. My question is a general one. When I'm looking at this space, what sticks out to you? Would you rearrange the space? Would you replace 1 or 2 things that are making it look outdated? It feels like a hodgepodge, and I'm not sure what to change first. I just bought the rattan shelving piece at an estate sale, and I love it, but I'm not sure it goes with anything now that I see it in the space. Do you have thoughts? How do I make this space make more sense and work better? I will note that the armoire is actually a liquor cabinet and craft cabinet, as our TV is in the basement. If we replace the armoire, we will need some storage." All right, so let's dig in, Kelsey, because looking through your pictures, the space does feel relatively unintentional. Now, you're asking for my first impressions, and this space is not too big, and it's kind of an open L shape for those of you listening and not viewing on YouTube. And we've got a sectional, we've got this small rattan shelving unit. It's really not that big or imposing. It's probably 4 feet high by 2 feet wide. We've got a small table and chairs set up. We've got that armoire for crafts. And then we've got a piano. So that's all in a relatively small L-shaped space, as well as a fireplace. It does feel tight and cramped. It does feel, because there's so many pieces floating in the space, whether it's the dining table and chairs, the armchair, the coffee table, everything feels unanchored. And when you have an open space, it's really important, well, an open multifunctional space, I should clarify. When you have an open multifunctional space, it's really important to define your zones, to visually show people where one area ends and the other area begins. And the very best way to do that, in my opinion, is with rugs, area rugs. Now, you have the big problem of the magic carpet ride under the coffee table. You have a circular flocati under your wood and wire coffee table. We definitely would define that living zone with a nice big rug that would go fully under the length of the sofa and extend out into the room and create that living zone. But when I'm designing a room, as you heard maybe on last week's episode, I start first by creating the floor plan. And I use a very specific system. So I never on the podcast share what people should do in terms of exactly how their furniture should be placed, because I use a systematic process, dropping everything in a drafted floor plan to make sure that the zones are in the right space. I try everything, leaving no stone unturned before I lock things in. So I highly recommend that you play with some different arrangements, whether you know a software system or whether you just want to use some graph paper. But this room is so tight that you really can't afford to mess up spatially. So you want to be strategic. You want to get the right size rugs for the right size placement for these things. So first thing, check your layout. Second thing, you've introduced this rattan shelf. And yes, it doesn't seem to go with the current pieces here. Now, again, you mentioned that you're on a budget. I am worried that you may be taking in low-cost items or taking in these donations that are sort of mismatched because you're feeling like you're on such a budget rather than being intentional. This is a trap, because we're starting to deviate from a well-defined style, and it's starting to look a bit like a garage sale or a curiosity shop rather than an intentional space. So I do want you to come up with that two-word phrase, and I do want you to come up with a specific color palette derived from an inspiration piece. Those are things that I think this room is lacking that will help you decide what to take in and what to turn away. Okay, so once you've created the floor plan, selected the inspiration piece, and have your two-word phrase in place, then you are ready to make some changes. Yeah, and some changes will need to be made. Yeah, I I think the floor plan is really the first place to go, Kelsey. And just offhand, I do think it looks a little jumbled. Like there's a floor lamp next to the armoire, there's a floor lamp next to the sectional. The floor lamp next to the sectional seems quite intentional, but the floor lamp next to the armoire I don't typically put a floor lamp that has a broad shade next to a piece that's not seating, right? So I might have been more inclined to do like an arcing lamp over the table or something like that. But again, it's all predicated on, do we have the right layout? And we certainly don't have anything driving this color palette. Now, I love the pop of blue with these dining chairs, and I love the rustic direction that some of these things are in. So I feel like you already have sort of an inkling of a style, but you're just not committing to it because the armoire is very transitional with its crown on the top and its shaker door front. I might even recommend, because it sounds like you're crafty, painting this piece because there's so much brown in the room. The piano's brown, the bench is brown, the flooring's brown, the table's brown, the armoire is brown, the armchair is brown, and the rattan shelving unit, as well as one of the floor lamps, all brown, as is the top of the coffee table. So I think we're on a one-way trip to Browntown here, and we need to break it up. And while I do not typically recommend painting furniture, I do think that painting this armoire, if you are crafty and do it the right way, meaning sanding and everything like that, will really make this piece feel more fresh and could fit in a variety of styles depending on the color you paint it. So this is a direction that I want you to start going down. Now, once you've committed, Kelsey, to both the floor plan and to a color palette or that two-word phrase, I want you to write me back with these exact same images, but maybe moving the pieces where you've decided that they need to go ultimately, because then I will have that guidepost that I can look at and say, oh, this is where we're going. Clearly, I can offer help in this way. But right now, I feel like you're just at the beginning of your journey and everything's a little bit lost. One other thing I like to say to my clients is get the plants out of there. Plants are just additional clutter until you've created that perfect layout, because one of these plants looks a little bit dead. The other one is thriving, but kind of an odd size for where it's placed. And then you have some dried fronds on the mantle. And right now it's just visually cluttering the space, but really it's the ones that I'm concerned about that are taking up floor space that you're like, oh, I need a place for this plant. Forget about plants until the primary pieces are placed. Then see where we can fill in with plants in areas that get good natural light. So one thing to cross off your function list or to not consider when you're doing your floor plan are those plants for right now. But don't worry, plant lovers. Once you've got that floor plan in place, we can drop them back in places that make sense. Okay, Kelsey, a little more homework before I'm able to guide you specifically, but I think I've given you some good initial work that you can certainly dig your teeth into and that will also make a huge impact in this room. A big thank you to Aton and the Embassy who wrote our theme song. A shout out to Catherine Heller who owns the podcast shop and is our editor extraordinaire. We also want to thank Ginny Sunasan and her team at the Savvy Podcast Agency for their help with our social, our YouTube channel, and so much more. We also want to thank Uploft, which is our parent company who supports this podcast. And lastly, we owe a huge debt of gratitude to you. Thank you so much for tuning in and for all your support.